Garrett Monroe thought the storm was the only thing he had to survive that night, until the scratching started. The old farmhouse creaked and groaned under the weight of the howling wind. Rain hammered the tin roof in wild, unpredictable bursts. Lightning split the black sky, revealing a world blurred by sheets of water and trembling shadows. Garrett glanced up from the kitchen table, coffee cooling in his hand, trying not to let the storm shake him. But storms always reminded him of things he tried to forget. His wife's accident, the night everything changed, and all the empty spaces that filled the house now. He glanced at the clock, nearly 11 p.m. Sophie should have been asleep by now, but his daughter was a night owl, especially on stormy nights. He could hear her faint giggle upstairs, probably reading comics under her blanket with a flashlight, thinking she was fooling him. Then he heard it. A scratching. So faint he almost convinced himself it was just another branch dragged across the siding by the wind. Then it came again, louder, more insistent, right at the back door. Garrett stiffened. He wasn't a nervous man, but out here, miles from the nearest neighbor, caution was a virtue. He set down his mug and crossed the kitchen, flipping on the back porch light. Outside, the rain shimmered like a silver curtain. Thunder cracked again, and in the sudden brightness, Garrett saw something move. A shadow hunched against the door, barely more than a mound, but alive, struggling. He hesitated, then unlatched the door, peering out. What he saw made his heart jolt. A dog, big, drenched, shivering, its fur matted with mud and blood, ribs showing beneath its thick black and tan coat. One paw was curled up against its chest. As Garrett opened the door wider, the animal lifted its head and tried to wag its tail, but the motion was weak, almost apologetic. "Dad? Who's out there?" Sophie's voice floated down the staircase. Garrett waved her back. "Stay inside, honey. Just a stray, I think." But Sophie was already at his side, eyes wide. "Oh my gosh. Dad, he's hurt." The dog whimpered softly, trying to stand, then collapsed again. Sophie's gaze met his, defiant and pleading all at once. "We have to help him. Please." Garrett wanted to say no. Every responsible fiber in his body screamed it. They didn't know this animal. He could be dangerous, sick, maybe worse. But as he looked at Sophie's face, and at the battered creature that somehow dragged itself through a storm to their door, something in him softened. "Okay," he said, grabbing an old beach towel from the laundry room. "But you stay back, all right? Let me check him out first." Sophie nodded, clutching the banister. Garrett knelt by the dog, murmuring gentle words as he approached. The animal sniffed his hand and, after a tense moment, licked his palm. Just once, then laid its head down again, eyes half closed. He wrapped the towel around the dog and, with a grunt, lifted him into his arms. The dog was heavy but limp with exhaustion. As Garrett carried him inside, Sophie ran ahead, clearing a spot by the fireplace. "Here, Dad, he can rest here. I'll get water. Can I get water?" "Yeah, good idea. Not too cold." Sophie scampered to the kitchen as Garrett laid the dog down. The creature shivered uncontrollably, eyes darting between them, more afraid than aggressive. Garrett fetched the first aid kit, gently checking for wounds. There was a gash on the dog's shoulder, raw and bleeding, and several cuts along his flank. Nothing looked fresh enough to be from tonight. Old scars peeked through the mud. Sophie returned with a bowl of water. The dog lifted his head and lapped eagerly, tail thumping the rug just once. "What should we call him?" Sophie asked, voice trembling with hope. Garrett shook his head, starting to clean the worst of the wounds. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. He's probably got an owner. Or at least, he did." He looks like a Rex," Sophie whispered, brushing her fingers lightly across the dog's forehead. The dog's ears twitched at the sound. "Rex, huh?" Garrett looked at the animal's soulful eyes, then back at his daughter. "That's a big name for a big dog." They worked in silence, storm raging around them, the little living room becoming a kind of sanctuary. Sophie watched every move, helping where she could, handing Garrett gauze, stroking Rex's head, whispering promises that everything would be okay. It was close to midnight when the dog finally drifted off to sleep, curled in a tight ball near the glowing embers. Thunder rumbled. Garrett sat back, watching Sophie and Rex, feeling an odd sense of calm. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the comfort of having someone to care for again. But deep down a seed of unease had taken root. The dog hadn't just appeared. He'd fought his way here, wounded and desperate, as if he'd been running from something or someone. As Garrett turned off the lights and ushered Sophie up to bed, the storm outside seemed to pale in comparison to the questions churning in his mind. Who was Rex running from? And what kind of trouble had just landed, battered and bleeding, on their doorstep? Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that this storm was just beginning. Morning in rural Indiana had always brought a kind of quiet peace for Garrett Monroe, a subtle reward after every battered storm. But today, as the first gray light seeped through the windows, the old farmhouse felt tense, like it was holding its breath. The only sound was the faint whimpering of the battered dog curled up on the rug. Garrett's back ached from sleeping upright on the couch, but he pushed himself up, instantly checking for Sophie. She was already awake, crouched beside Rex, whispering softly. Her hair was tangled, her eyes shining with concern and a strange excitement. She looked up, beaming as Garrett approached. He slept the whole night, Dad. I think he trusts us. Garrett knelt, giving the dog another careful inspection. The wounds had stopped bleeding, but Rex's breathing was shallow and his eyes clouded with pain. He needs a vet, Garrett said quietly, brushing mud from the dog's fur, and we need to figure out who he belongs to. But what if he doesn't want to go? Sophie's voice was small, uncertain. What if he's scared? Garrett glanced at her, then at the animal, so clearly traumatized, so desperate for a safe place. It's not about what he wants. It's what he needs. If he's chipped, we'll find out where he came from. Sophie nodded, but her lips tightened. She was already attached. Garrett could see it in the way she stroked Rex's head, murmuring his name again and again. He didn't blame her. The drive to the vet was a blur of nervous silence. Garrett wrapped Rex in the old towel, cradling him in the back seat, while Sophie sat close, offering reassurance. The dog barely moved, just watched the world with wide, anxious eyes. The rain had stopped, but the roads were slick with fallen leaves and storm debris. The nearest vet clinic was 20 minutes away, a small converted house run by Dr. Kimberly Reese, who knew nearly everyone within 30 miles. As they pulled in, Garrett saw Rosie, the vet tech, unlocking the front door. She spotted them and jogged over, face creased with concern. Early morning visitors? What's the story? Garrett explained quickly, lifting Rex from the car. Rosie's gaze softened as she examined the dog's wounds. He's been through hell, poor guy. Bring him in, we'll get him stable. Inside, the clinic was warm and filled with the soft hum of equipment. Sophie hovered by the exam table, wide-eyed as Dr. Reese and Rosie worked. They clipped Rex's fur, cleaned his wounds, and started fluids. He's lucky you found him, Dr. Reese said, scanning Rex's neck for a microchip. A few more hours in that storm and... The scanner beeped. Rosie's eyes widened. He's chipped. Name's, yep, Rex. Owner, Henry Walker. Address up by Pine Creek. Garrett frowned. Walker? That's old Henry's place. But I heard he... Rosie's mouth tightened. He passed away a couple weeks ago. They found him at his cabin. A heart attack, or so they said. Dr. Reese's hands paused. Henry Walker. The Vietnam vet. Rosie nodded. Yeah, lived alone, kept to himself. People said he had a nephew who visited sometimes, but... She trailed off, her expression troubled. Sophie tugged at Garrett's sleeve. What happens to Rex now? If his owner's gone? Dr. Reese sighed, giving Sophie a kind smile. That's up to animal control. But given his condition and how far he traveled, well, we'll have to notify them. But for now, he can stay here while he recovers. Sophie looked stricken. He was running from something. You said he was found at our place. Maybe he needed us. Garrett tried to soothe her. We'll do everything we can. Let's just let him rest. But as the hours passed, the story only grew stranger. Rosie cleaned Rex's wounds and quietly told Garrett, these aren't from fighting with another dog. These look, man-made. Like he was trying to escape something sharp, maybe a trap, or someone. That afternoon, Garrett drove home with Sophie, the car unusually quiet. Sophie stared out the window, arms crossed. He was trying to find us, she said. I know it. Garrett didn't answer, but that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, he sat in the living room, mind whirling. He couldn't shake the image of Henry Walker, a reclusive veteran with only a dog for company, dying alone in a cabin. Why had Rex come to them? Was it just luck? Or was there something else? A knock at the door startled him. Rosie stood outside, raincoat soaked, clutching a folder. Garrett, I did some digging. Rex was found at your place, but his chip was never updated after Henry died. Animal control wants to take him tomorrow. But there's something you should see. She opened the folder. Inside were copies of Henry's adoption papers, medical notes, and a hand-scribbled letter. If anything happens to me, look after Rex. He's not safe with Caleb. Henry. Garrett's heart thudded. Caleb. Henry's nephew, Rosie said, voice low. A real piece of work. Been in trouble before. Henry was always worried about him. As Garrett processed this, Sophie crept downstairs, rubbing her eyes. She saw Rosie's folder, the papers, and her face fell. They're not taking him, are they? Garrett knelt, putting his hands on her shoulders. I don't know, honey, but I promise, we're going to figure this out. Rex found us for a reason. We owe it to him to try. That night, the house felt even more exposed, every shadow loaded with tension. Garrett barely slept. Every time the wind rattled the window, he was up, checking the locks. When the first rays of dawn crept across the kitchen, he made a decision. And he was going to find out what happened to Henry Walker, and why Rex had risked everything to get to them. As the sun rose, casting long golden bars through the trees, Sophie appeared, hugging her knees to her chest. Can we see Rex? She asked softly. Garrett nodded. Yeah, we're not giving up on him. Outside, the world looked peaceful again. But for Garrett, Sophie, and Rex, the real storm was just beginning. The Monroe house was quieter than usual, but tension lingered in the corners, stretching from room to room. For 2 days, Sophie barely left her room except to beg Garrett for updates from the vet. Every hour, she asked if they could visit Rex. Garrett called the clinic 3 times a day. Rosie assured him Reg was holding steady, slowly regaining strength. Still, Sophie's eyes seemed to carry a new heaviness, something she was trying to hide. On the 3rd night, thunder rolled in again. A low, distant growl. Garrett was in the kitchen finishing dishes when he heard Sophie cry out from upstairs, sharp and sudden. He bolted up the stairs, heart pounding, and burst into her room. Sophie was sitting bolt upright, tangled in her sheets, face slick with sweat. Her lamp cast wild shadows on the wall. She looked up, wide-eyed, shaking. Dad, he showed me. He showed me. Oh, Garrett rushed to her side, kneeling next to the bed. You're okay. It was just a dream. No, it wasn't. Not just a dream. I saw him. Henry. And Rex was there too. There was this man with a scar on his cheek and a door, like in the floor. He kept pointing at it. And he was scared, Dad. I could feel it. Garrett swallowed. Sophie, it's just a nightmare. You've been worried about Rex and about Henry, and she shook her head, interrupting. No, you don't get it. Rex was there. I could see through his eyes, and then I saw the man with the scar. He hurt Rex. There was something under the floor, and Henry wanted us to find it. Garrett tried to reassure her, brushing hair from her forehead. Sweetheart, you know sometimes our minds play tricks on us when we're worried. Sophie stared back, her face set. I'm telling you the truth, Dad. It felt real, like Rex is trying to tell me something. Garrett struggled to find the right words. He wanted to comfort his daughter, but her conviction shook him. He couldn't remember the last time she'd been this insistent about anything, especially a dream. That morning, they drove to the clinic. Garrett was silent on the way. Sophie sat with her hands clenched, watching the landscape rush by in a blur. When they arrived, Rosie led them to the back, where Rex was resting on a blanket. His eyes brightened when Sophie entered, his tail beating a weak rhythm against the linoleum. Sophie knelt and whispered, I saw what happened. I promise we'll help you. Rosie raised an eyebrow at Garrett, but he only shrugged. Sophie spent a long time with Rex, stroking his fur, murmuring secrets. Garrett wandered outside with Rosie, who offered him a cup of coffee. She seems really attached, Rosie said. Sometimes kids her age. Grief does weird things. Garrett nodded, but kept the rest to himself. When they left, Sophie looked calmer, but her mind was elsewhere. That night, Sophie's dreams returned, fiercer and clearer. She woke up gasping, heart hammering, clutching her pillow. Garrett found her standing in the hallway, staring at nothing. Dad, there's something under the floor at Henry's cabin. Rex remembers. He's showing me. The man with the scar. He took something, but he left something behind. I think Rex wants us to find it. Garrett hesitated. Sophie, how would you even know that? She looked up, fierce and afraid. I just do. Please, we have to go to Henry's place. Garrett raked a hand through his hair, exasperated. Even if you're right, Sophie, we can't just break into someone's house. It's not breaking in. No one lives there. Henry's gone. And Rex needs us to go. Garrett remembered the letter Rosie had shown him. If anything happens to me, look after Rex. He's not safe with Caleb. He remembered the sharp, haunted look in Rosie's eyes when she mentioned Henry's nephew. He remembered the feeling he'd had when he first found Rex, like the dog was carrying a message. Finally, he sighed. All right, I'll call Rosie in the morning, see what she thinks. But Sophie was restless all night. At breakfast, she barely touched her food, her gaze far away. Later that day, Garrett called Rosie. He tried to sound casual, but Rosie picked up on the tension in his voice. He explained Sophie's dreams, the images, the scarred man, the trapdoor, something hidden beneath the floorboards. There was a long silence, then Rosie spoke quietly. You know, Henry once mentioned keeping things safe at the cabin. Said he didn't trust Banks or his family. Maybe it's not just a coincidence. That afternoon, Sophie finally smiled, a real fleeting smile. When Garrett told her they'd go, "We'll take Rex," she said. "He'll show us." Rosie met them at the clinic, loading Rex carefully into the back seat. The dog's eyes followed Sophie the whole way, and when they turned onto the gravel road that led to Henry's cabin, Rex's head perked up, ears alert. The cabin was a squat, weather-beaten building at the edge of the woods. The windows were dirty and cracked. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Sophie stepped out first, Rex hobbling beside her, nose to the ground. She paused at the porch, almost as if waiting for permission from some unseen presence. Garrett followed, unlocking the door with the old key Rosie had borrowed from the county. The cabin's interior was cold and dim, furniture covered in sheets. Sophie moved quickly, as if guided by invisible threads, straight to the living room. "There," she said, pointing at a patch of worn floorboards beneath an old rocking chair. "That's the place from my dream." Garrett hesitated, but then began pulling at the edges of the boards. They creaked and groaned, but finally gave way. Beneath, wedged into the dirt, was a rusted old footlocker. Before they could open it, headlights flashed through the window. A car crunched up the gravel drive, stopping just outside. Garrett's blood ran cold. "Someone's here," Rosie whispered. Rex growled, low and menacing. "Sophie, get behind me," Garrett said, his voice tense. They heard a car door slam, boots on the porch, the knob rattled. Garrett pushed the floorboard back into place, motioning for Sophie and Rosie to move quietly toward the kitchen. The front door rattled again, harder. For a moment, everything hung suspended, the storm outside, the tension inside, the secrets beneath their feet. Then the headlights snapped off. The footsteps retreated, and the car peeled away into the darkness. Rosie exhaled, shaking. That wasn't a coincidence. Someone knew we'd be here. Garrett's hands shook as he helped Sophie up. They didn't open the footlocker. Nah, not yet. They had to get out. Fast. They left the cabin as quietly as they could, hearts pounding, Rex limping but determined beside Sophie. Back at home, Garrett finally believed it. Sophie's visions weren't just dreams. Something, maybe Rex, maybe fate, was leading them straight into a mystery far bigger and far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Rain tapped lightly against the living room windows as Garrett double-checked every lock for the third time that evening. The shadows outside seemed to move with a life of their own, and the anxiety in his chest had become a dull ache he couldn't shake. Since their trip to Henry's cabin, Garrett's sense of safety, already fragile, had evaporated. Sophie sat cross-legged on the couch, eyes glued to a dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Rex dozed at her feet, twitching occasionally as if still running through the woods in his dreams. Rosie had dropped him off that morning after another checkup, but she left a warning. "If you notice anything strange, call me. And Garrett, be careful." Strange things started happening right away. Garrett noticed it first. Muddy boot prints by the back door that didn't match any shoes in the house. He wiped them away, thinking maybe he tracked them in himself. But that night, more appeared, circling around the house, stopping right outside Sophie's window. The following morning, as Garrett walked out to his old pickup, he saw a fresh gouge running down the length of the driver's side. A jagged line, unmistakably keyed by someone with a grudge. His heart pounded. He scanned the street, but only the cornfields looked back. He didn't mention it to Sophie, not wanting to frighten her more than she already was. But that evening, as they sat down for dinner, Sophie seemed uneasy. She pushed her mac and cheese around her plate. "Dad? Rex is worried," she said softly. "He keeps sleeping by my door. He growled at the window last night. Do you think someone's out there?" Garrett glanced at the dog. Rex, who normally slept at the foot of Sophie's bed, now stretched across the hallway in front of her door every night. Ears perked, eyes alert to every sound. Even when Garrett tried to coax him away, Rex refused to move, only relaxing when Sophie was safe behind a locked door. I don't know, Soph," Garrett said, forcing a smile, "but I'll keep us safe. That's a promise." Later that night, while Sophie slept, Garrett sat in the darkened living room, shotgun across his knees. He told himself it was probably nothing, a stray animal, a neighborhood kid playing pranks. But deep down, he felt watched. The next day brought more unsettling discoveries. The mailbox was smashed, its contents torn and scattered in the ditch. Rex barked at nothing for 10 minutes, staring into the tree line as if he could see a presence just beyond human sight. Sophie became more withdrawn, and her dreams grew stranger. She began drawing pictures, always the same. A man with a jagged scar, standing in the dark, and a pair of bright dog's eyes, peering out from beneath the floor. Garrett didn't know what to say. He collected the drawings, tucking them away in a drawer, unable to throw them out, but too afraid to display them. One night, Garrett was jolted awake by Rex's furious barking. He sprang out of bed, heart racing, and found Rex planted in front of the back door, hackles raised, teeth bared at the night beyond the glass. Garrett flicked on the floodlights. In the yellow glare, he caught a glimpse. A figure, just at the edge of the yard, frozen for a split second before vanishing into the corn. Garrett burst out the door, yelling, but the only answer was the wind and the rustle of leaves. He searched the perimeter, shotgun in hand. He found nothing except, near the fence, a cigarette butt, fresh and still smoldering. Whoever was out there had been close, watching. Inside, Sophie waited, pale and shaking, clutching Rex's collar. "Was it him, Dad? The man from my dreams?" Garrett hesitated. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they're not getting in here." He started locking every door, every window, every night, checking them all twice. He set up a camera by the porch, rigged a motion sensor light over the garage. Sleep came, in short, broken bursts. Rosie came by the next afternoon to check on Rex's bandages. Garrett pulled her aside, lowering his voice. "I think someone's watching us. There have been signs." Rosie frowned, glancing at Sophie and Rex. You think it's Caleb? Or someone after what Henry left behind?" Garrett shook his head. "I don't know, but Sophie's scared out of her mind. And so am I." Rosie looked at him, serious. "If you need a place to stay, you can come to my house. But, maybe you should go to the sheriff." Garrett hesitated. He'd always prided himself on handling his own problems. But this felt different. That night, he sat on the porch, gun across his lap, watching the fields. The air felt heavier than the night before. Rex sat at his side, ears pricked, gaze never leaving the darkness. It wasn't long before the motion light snapped on, flooding the yard in harsh white. Garrett saw him this time, a man, tall and broad, moving between the trees. Their eyes met for a brief, heart-stopping moment. The man smiled, showing a row of yellowed teeth, then disappeared into the night. Rex lunged, barking like fury, but Garrett called him back. He knew better than to chase someone into the fields in the dark. Inside, he checked on Sophie, who pretended to sleep but clutched her old stuffed rabbit tightly. Garrett kissed her forehead, heart heavy with dread. Before dawn, Garrett made a decision. No more waiting, no more fear. He'd go back to Henry's cabin and find out what was so important that it brought danger to his doorstep. The next morning, as the sun rose blood-red over the cornfields, he made a plan with Sophie and Rosie. "We're going back to the cabin," he told them. "But this time we're not running. We're going to find the truth." Rex pressed close to Sophie, ready for whatever came next. Outside, the wind rustled the corn, carrying secrets and the promise of a reckoning. The threat had come home, and Garrett knew it was only a matter of time before it knocked, demanding answers. But now, at least, he was ready to answer back. The Monroe home felt smaller now, every creak and groan echoing with possibility. Garrett couldn't shake the image of the man's face from his mind, that twisted smile, eyes that glinted with something hungry in the glare of the motion light. He barely slept, mind caught between protecting Sophie and unraveling the secrets that had spilled into their lives. After breakfast, if dry toast and cold coffee counted as breakfast, and Garrett tucked Sophie's latest drawing into his jacket pocket. Another image of the scarred man, this time holding something that looked like a key. He kissed the top of her head, tried to smile. "I'll be back soon, kiddo. Stay inside. Don't open the door for anyone except me or Rosie." Sophie nodded, clutching Rex. "He'll keep me safe," she whispered. Rex thumped his tail once, as if agreeing. As all Garrett drove toward town, mind spinning. There was one person who knew Henry, and maybe Rex, better than anyone besides family, Rosie, the vet tech. She'd worked with Henry for years, patching up Rex after every scrape, helping the old man with supplies when he couldn't get into town. Garrett hoped she might have answers the authorities had missed. He found her at the clinic, elbows deep in paperwork. Her face lit up with cautious relief when she saw him. "You look like hell, Garrett." "Not much sleep lately," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. He took a seat, lowering his voice. "Rosie, I need to know what you remember about Henry's family. And Rex. There's someone threatening my daughter. He's not giving up." Rosie sat across from him, her eyes narrowing. "I figured it would come to this. Henry tried to keep his life private, but he trusted me more than most. He worried a lot about his nephew, Caleb." She got up, rummaged through a battered file cabinet, and produced a small folder. "Henry asked me to hang on to some things, just in case. Letters, copies of old emails. And this." She handed him a worn audio recorder, the kind reporters used in the 90s. Garrett turned it over in his hands, heart pounding. What's on it?" Rosie hesitated. Henry's voice. "He started recording everything after the break-in last winter. He told me if anything happened to him or Rex, I should go to the sheriff, but I was scared. Caleb is trouble, Garrett. He was stealing from Henry. Guns, money, anything he could get his hands on. There were rumors he was mixed up in black market weapons sales. Henry was gathering proof, military paperwork, serial numbers. He wanted to turn Caleb in, but he was afraid." She slid a few pages across the table, copies of emails, bank statements, a photograph of Henry and Rex from last spring. "I don't know what's in the locker of the cabin, but I bet it ties Caleb to everything." Garrett's mind reeled. Why didn't Henry just go to the police? He tried, but Caleb always seemed to know. Henry said he found his mail open, things missing from the cabin. The break-in that hurt Rex wasn't random. Caleb was looking for something, proof Henry kept hidden, and then Henry died. Rosie's voice shook. "I never believed it was just a heart attack, not with everything else going on." Garrett pocketed the recorder and letters, the weight of them heavy and cold. "Thank you, Rosie. I'll do what Henry couldn't." Before he left, Rosie reached out, squeezing his hand. "Be careful. Caleb's not the kind to back down, especially if he thinks you have what he wants." Garrett nodded, jaw set. He drove straight to the sheriff's office, but the deputy at the front desk, an old-timer named Pete, gave him a runaround. "We looked into Henry's death, son. No sign of foul play. If you're having trouble with trespassers, file a report, and we'll send someone by." Garrett clenched his teeth, but left before his temper could get the best of him. If the law wouldn't listen, he'd handle it himself. He picked up groceries and a new padlock for the shed. At the checkout, the cashier, a woman in her 60s who'd grown up with Henry, leaned over whispering, "Watch your back, Garrett. Folks say Caleb's been seen at the old truck stop asking about you." Garrett's stomach dropped. The threat was growing, circling closer every day. He hurried home, half expecting to find the place ransacked. And instead, Sophie and Rex were waiting in the living room. Sophie's face brightened when she saw him, but her relief was short-lived. "I had another dream," she said. Rex was running through the woods again, but this time he wasn't alone. He heard voices, Caleb's voice. He said, "Where is it? Where did he hide it?" And then Rex hid under the floor, where we found the box. Garrett knelt beside her, taking her hands. "You're doing good, Soph. We're getting closer to figuring this out. But I need you to promise me you'll stay safe, no matter what." Sophie nodded, fierce. "I promise. But you have to promise me too." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Deal." After dinner, Garrett listened to Henry's audio journal in the privacy of his workshop. The old man's voice was rough, tinged with fear and regret. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. Caleb's been stealing from me. Money, guns, things I brought back from the service. He threatened Rex, said he'd hurt him if I didn't give him what he wanted. I hid the proof, audio files, paperwork, everything, under the floorboards in the living room. If Caleb finds it, he'll destroy it. I'm sorry, Rex. I should have done more. If anyone finds this, take care of my dog. And tell the truth, please." Hey, Garrett's hands shook as he turned off the recorder. Every piece fit. The break-in, Henry's fear, Rex's wounds, the scarred man stalking their house. He called Rosie, his voice barely steady. We have to get that locker before Caleb does. There's enough in Henry's files to take him down. Can you meet us tomorrow at the cabin? Rosie agreed. Then I'll bring a friend from animal control, someone I trust. No cops, not yet. That night, Garrett kept watch, shotgun in hand, every nerve on edge. Rex slept in the hallway, a silent sentry. Sophie drifted off only after Garrett promised he'd be awake all night. Hey, but even as the house settled into uneasy quiet, Garrett knew the confrontation was coming. The truth had drawn Caleb to their door, and Garrett was done running. He looked at the battered old dog, stretched across the floor. We'll do this for Henry, he whispered. Or for Rex. For Sophie. No more hiding. A flash of lightning illuminated the fields outside. For the first time in weeks, Garrett felt something like resolve. Whatever darkness was coming, they would face it. Together. The next morning dawned heavy and gray, low clouds pressing on the rooftops as if trying to keep secrets buried. Garrett barely slept. He brewed coffee before sunrise, pacing the kitchen and glancing at the clock every few minutes. Sophie appeared just after 6, dressed and ready. Her eyes clear despite the nightmares that haunted her. Rex lumbered close behind, still moving with a limp, but tail wagging for her alone. Sophie sat quietly at the table, her voice almost a whisper. Rex wants us to go today, Dad, as he's ready. Garrett knelt and pressed his forehead to hers, letting her small hands cup his cheeks. We'll be careful. Yeah, we won't let anyone hurt you. Or Rex, I promise. They loaded Rex into the back of the truck, spreading an old quilt for him to lay on. As they pulled out of the driveway, Garrett scanned the street for any sign of Caleb's truck or that battered sedan he'd glimpsed before. Nothing yet, but the air felt thick, like a thunderstorm was coming, just out of sight. Rosie met them a mile from Henry's cabin, waving from her Subaru. She'd brought Maggie, a stout woman from animal control, whose eyes flickered with curiosity and suspicion. You sure about this? Maggie asked. If that kid Caleb's anywhere nearby... Garrett nodded grimly. We don't have a choice. Whatever Henry hid, it's what Caleb's after. He won't stop. Sophie slid out of the truck, Rex close by her side. She reached down, fingers tangled in his fur. He'll show us. I know he will. The walk to the cabin was quiet. Just the crunch of boots on wet leaves and the occasional distant caw of a crow. The woods felt tense, as if even the animals sensed something was about to change. The cabin sat silent, windows clouded, the porch sagging under the weight of rain and neglect. Garrett unlocked the door, heart pounding. The group moved inside, Sophie leading the way. Rex's nose to the ground, sniffing the familiar path. She paused in the middle of the living room, her breath shallow. It's here, Dad, she said, voice trembling but certain. She stepped toward the loose floorboard, the same one she'd seen so many times in her dreams. Garrett knelt, heart hammering. With Rosie's help, he pried the board loose, the old wood creaking in protest. Beneath, buried in a shallow hollow in the dirt, was the footlocker. Battered, rusted, heavy with secrets. Rex whined, tail tucked, pressing close to Sophie as if trying to shield her from whatever darkness might spill out. Let's open it here, Rosie said, glancing at the front windows. We don't know if we'll get another chance. Maggie stood guard by the front door, hand on her phone, ready to call for backup if needed. Garrett spun the dial on the padlock. It clicked open with a reluctant snap. He lifted the lid, revealing Henry's past. Inside were folders of documents, old photographs, several USB drives, a handful of dog tags, and a battered military-issue pistol wrapped in oilcloth. Garrett pulled out the top folder, leafing through copies of bank statements, weapon serial numbers, and black and white photographs. Caleb, years younger, posing with Henry beside the cabin. One photograph was marked with Henry's careful handwriting. For the police, if I don't make it. Rosie's eyes widened as she thumbed through the stack. There's enough here to lock Caleb up for years. Black market sales, fake IDs, threats. This is what he was after. Suddenly, headlights cut through the living room window, bright, blinding, washing out the world beyond the cabin in harsh white. The sound of gravel crunching. Garrett's blood went cold. Get down, he hissed, motioning Sophie and Rex behind the couch. Maggie moved to the back door, peeking through the curtain. 2 men climbed out of the battered sedan. Caleb and a wiry guy in a camo jacket. Caleb's face was set in a sneer, the scar on his cheek a pale, angry line. He's got a gun, Maggie whispered, eyes wide. Garrett scanned the room, clutching the footlocker. We can't let him have this. Sophie, stay with Rex. Rosie, you and Maggie, go out the back. Get to the car. Call that sheriff. I'll stall him. No, Sophie cried, but Rex nudged her, as if telling her to trust. The front door rattled, then burst open. Caleb stepped inside, weapon drawn, eyes flicking to the box in Garrett's hands. Thought you could outsmart me, huh? He spat. Give me what's mine. Garrett set the footlocker down, raising his hands. This isn't yours, Caleb. This is evidence. Evidence Henry wanted the cops to see. Caleb laughed, the sound sharp and wild. Henry was a coward. Old fool wouldn't give me what I deserved. Now you're going to pay for it, just like he did. Garrett saw Rosie and Maggie slip out the back, phones in hand. He prayed they'd get help before things got worse. Let Sophie and Rex go, Garrett said, keeping his voice steady. This is between you and me. Caleb sneered, stepping closer. That little brat knows too much. The mutt, too. You think I'm going to leave witnesses? Garrett's heart hammered. Sophie pressed her face to Rex's neck, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The outside sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Help was coming, but would it be in time? Caleb's friend moved to block the back exit. Tie him up, Caleb barked. The man stepped forward, but Rex lunged, teeth bared, snarling with all the fury and courage left in his old bones. Chaos erupted. Garrett tackled Caleb, sending the gun skidding across the floor. Sophie screamed, clutching Rex as Caleb's friend tried to drag her away. Rosie burst back in, swinging a heavy flashlight, catching the man in the side. Rex bit down, holding fast to the man's arm until he howled and let go. Sophie scrambled free, racing to Garrett's side. Caleb scrambled for the gun, but Maggie kicked it away, then pepper-sprayed him with a hiss. Caleb cursed, swinging wildly, but Garrett pinned him down, adrenaline lending him strength. Red and blue lights strobed through the windows as the sheriff's deputies poured in, weapons drawn. On the ground, hands up! Within seconds, Caleb and his accomplice were cuffed and dragged outside, cursing and spitting. Rosie wrapped her arms around Sophie, who sobbed with relief. Garrett slumped to the floor, exhaustion and fear leaving him trembling. Rex limped over and rested his head on Sophie's lap, eyes soft and trusting. In that battered old cabin, surrounded by proof of Henry's fears and courage, Sophie looked at Garrett and whispered, "We did it, Dad. Rex showed us the way." Garrett nodded, pulling her into his arms, feeling, for the first time in weeks, a glimmer of hope. The worst had come and gone, but their fight for the truth, for justice, had brought them closer together. And somewhere, Garrett liked to think, Henry Walker was finally at peace. The adrenaline of the rescue still pulsed through Garrett's veins long after the sirens faded into the morning. The cabin's battered front door hung crooked, a silent testament to the night's violence. Deputies hustled Caleb and his accomplice into patrol cars, flashing lights painting the forest in frantic streaks of red and blue. For a moment, the woods around Henry's old home felt safer than they had in weeks. But when Garrett finally let himself breathe, exhaustion washed over him. Raw, shuddering, deeper than sleep. Sophie clung to Rex, face pressed to his fur, Rosie never far from her side. Maggie, her voice clipped but warm, took statements from everyone. They all repeated the same thing. Caleb had broken in, he'd threatened Sophie, tried to take the locker. Rex had protected them, just like he'd once protected Henry. Yet, something gnawed at Garrett. He could still smell the anger in Caleb's voice, the unfinished business in his glare as the deputies pulled him away. When all was quieter, the sheriff, an older man named Carter, sat with Garrett on the porch steps, flipping through Henry's folder. "This is good evidence," Carter admitted, "but something tells me this ain't over yet. Caleb's not the type to give up easy, even behind bars. There might be others who want what's in here." Garrett nodded, tension creeping back into his bones. "What do we do?" "We'll keep someone on patrol near your place," Carter promised. "But be careful, keep your doors locked. If you see or hear anything strange, call me, day or night." Sophie was quiet all the way home, her eyes rarely leaving Rex. The old dog, though limping, seemed lighter somehow, almost proud, basking in Sophie's endless praise. "You're my hero," she whispered over and over. "You're the bravest dog in the world." That night, Garrett slept with the shotgun propped against his chair. He played Henry's audio files in the darkness, listening to the trembling regret in the old man's voice. If something happens to me, it'll be because of Caleb. I wish I'd done more. I wish I'd trusted someone sooner. If you find this, whoever you are, don't let him hurt Rex. Or anyone else." The next day brought a grim sense of peace. Rosie checked on Sophie and Rex, bringing homemade cookies and a pile of legal papers the sheriff needed. Sophie seemed to relax a little, drawing again. This time, pictures of herself and Rex standing in the sunlight, the man with the scar nowhere in sight. But Garrett couldn't relax. He fixed the lock on the garage, made sure every window was secure, and kept an eye on the horizon every time a car slowed near the property. That afternoon, the sheriff called. "We got a problem. Caleb's friend made bail. As they're both missing." Rosie, who was with them when the call came in, paled. "They'll come back, Garrett. You know they will." Garrett pressed his lips tight. "Then we'll be ready." That night, a new threat loomed. Just after midnight, Rex began to growl, a deep, warning rumble from the base of his chest. Garrett peeked through the curtains. Headlights flashed across the driveway, then went dark. A car door slammed. Garrett moved fast, waking Sophie and telling her to stay with Rex and Rosie, who had stayed the night. He crept downstairs, shotgun in hand, every muscle coiled. The house was silent except for the wind, and for a moment, Garrett wondered if his nerves were playing tricks. Then, glass shattered in the garage. Heavy boots thudded on the concrete. Garrett flipped the floodlights and stormed out, heart pounding. Caleb was there, wild-eyed, gun in hand, dragging a bag behind him. His accomplice hovered by the open window, looking as jittery as a trapped fox. Garrett's voice thundered. "It's over, Caleb. The cops are on their way. Get out now, before someone gets hurt." Caleb sneered, gun waving. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's in that locker? You think you're a hero, but you're just another loser in my way." Rex, sensing the threat, pushed past Sophie and charged down the hallway, barking fiercely. Sophie screamed, but Rosie held her back, whispering, "He knows what he's doing. Trust him." The next moments unfolded in chaos. Caleb lunged at Garrett, pistol raised. Garrett swung the shotgun, knocking Caleb's arm aside. The gun clattered to the ground. Caleb's accomplice darted forward, but Rosie, wielding a heavy wrench from the workbench, blocked his path. Garrett and Caleb wrestled, fists flying, grunts echoing in the garage. Suddenly, a piercing scream. Sophie's voice. Rex!" Caleb, breaking free, dashed toward the house, grabbing Sophie and pinning her against the wall. "Open the locker, or she gets hurt," he snarled, pressing the cold steel of a backup pistol to her head. Garrett froze, rage and terror colliding in his chest. Rex, unafraid, bared his teeth and lunged, clamping down on Caleb's arm with all the strength left in his aging body. Caleb howled, trying to shake the dog loose, but Rex held on, snarling, refusing to let go. Garrett took his chance. He tackled Caleb, sending both crashing into the hallway. The gun skidded across the floor, landing at Rosie's feet. She snatched it up, pointing it at Caleb's accomplice, who raised his hands, backing away. Rex and Sophie scrambled free as Garrett pinned Caleb to the ground, pressing his knee into the man's back. Sirens wailed in the distance, closer this time. "It's over, Caleb," Garrett shouted. "You're not getting away again." Rex stood guard over Sophie, blood trickling from a cut on his ear, but eyes bright, tail wagging once. Sophie threw her arms around him, crying, "You saved me again! You're the bravest, best dog in the world!" Deputies burst through the front door, guns drawn. In minutes, Caleb and his accomplice were cuffed, faces smashed into the dirt. The house was flooded with uniforms and urgent voices. Sheriff Carter found Garrett slumped against the wall, hands shaking. "You all right, Monroe?" Garrett nodded, exhaustion finally catching up. He looked at Sophie, safe in Rosie's arms, and at Rex, panting, battered, but still standing. "We're all right, thanks to him." The deputies collected the footlocker and the audio drive, documenting everything. Sheriff Carter turned to Garrett, shaking his hand. "You did good. Henry would be proud." As the last squad car disappeared down the road, quiet returned. Garrett sat on the porch, watching the sun rise, Rosie at his side, Sophie curled up with Rex, her hand never leaving his fur. For the first time in weeks, Garrett let himself believe it. The nightmare was over. Justice was coming for Henry, for Rex, for his family. And he owed it all to the battered dog who had fought again and again for the people he loved. Dawn brought a rare hush to the Monroe house, a sense of fragile peace, as if the very air knew something dark had finally broken. Sophie slept curled against Rex in the living room, one hand tangled in his fur, unwilling to let go even in her dreams. Garrett and Rosie sat at the kitchen table, faces lit by the soft blue glow of Garrett's laptop. Outside, the sheriff's cruiser idled, a reminder that danger was still possible, but for the first time, the threat felt contained. Rosie placed a stack of Henry's files on the table, her hands trembling slightly. "We need to go through everything before we hand it over," she said quietly. If there's anything in here the sheriff misses, it could make all the difference. Garrett nodded, too exhausted for words. They plugged Henry's old flash drive into the laptop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a folder popped up. For the police, filled with audio files, scanned letters, photos, and spreadsheets with serial numbers and coded entries. Garrett clicked the first audio file. Henry's voice, rough and weathered, filled the kitchen. If you're hearing this, then Rex made it. He always was smarter than me. My nephew, Caleb, he's not right. He started stealing, lying, guns, cash, anything he thought he could sell. I tried to stop him. That's when the threats started. I couldn't trust anyone, so I started keeping records. I kept everything in the locker. If something happens to me, it'll be because Caleb found out. Please keep Rex safe. And get this to the law. Rosie blinked back tears. He must have known. He must have known it would come to this. They listened to more. Henry detailing weapon serial numbers and shady transactions, referencing phone calls he'd secretly recorded with Caleb, proof of sales to known criminals and threats to silence him if he went to the police. One recording made Rosie shudder. Caleb's voice, cold, desperate, unmistakable, threatened Henry, demanded to know where the files were, swore he'd burn the cabin to the ground if he had to. In the background, Rex could be heard barking, Henry's voice pleading with Caleb to leave them alone. Garrett turned to Rosie. There's enough here to bury Caleb, and maybe even bust up the whole ring he was involved with. She nodded, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. We need to take this straight to Sheriff Carter. No more waiting. Sophie woke just as Garrett printed out the most damning documents. As she shuffled into the kitchen, Rex at her side. Did you find it? She asked, her voice small but hopeful. Garrett smiled, sliding an arm around her shoulders. We did, kiddo. Henry didn't die for nothing. And neither did Rex's pain. Rosie called Sheriff Carter, who arrived within minutes. Uniform crisp, but eyes tired. He listened to the audio, brows furrowed, and whistled low. You folks did good. This'll be enough for a judge to keep Caleb locked up for a long time. And if the feds get involved, well, this could go even further. He took the files, promising to update them as soon as anything broke. If you're willing, I'd like you both to come down to the station and give full statements. He added. It'll help make sure nothing gets missed. Before they left, Garrett glanced at Rex. The old dog's wounds were healing, but he was moving slower than before. Even so, when Sophie bent to hug him, Rex's tail thumped in steady rhythm, a fighter's spirit still flickering in his eyes. At the sheriff's office, the air buzzed with nervous excitement. Deputies pored over the evidence, calling in ATF agents and sending digital files to the state police. Rosie gave her statement, detailing everything she'd seen, the threats, Caleb's behavior, her suspicions about Henry's death. Sophie stayed close to Garrett, answering questions bravely. She told the detectives about her dreams, about Rex showing her the way, about the trapdoor and the man with the scar. Most of the officers smiled gently, chalking it up to a child's imagination, but Carter took her seriously, patting her hand and thanking her for her courage. When it was Garrett's turn, he told the whole story, finding Rex in the storm, the break-ins, Sophie's visions, the night at the cabin, the final confrontation. He didn't gloss over the fear or the failures, wanting Henry's story to be told honestly. Hours passed as investigators came and went. They dusted the footlocker for prints, examined the pistol, and checked the cabin's floor for signs of tampering. The more they found, the stronger the case against Caleb became. By late afternoon, the sheriff gathered everyone in his office. We've got enough to charge Caleb with everything from burglary to weapons trafficking, and the feds are looking into the rest. That audio, your statements, Rex's wounds, it all lines up. The grand jury'll indict by week's end. Rosie let out a shaky breath. Thank God. But Carter wasn't finished. Henry's files mention a couple of names we're tracking. Might be others who want what Caleb was after. I'd keep your heads down for a while. And keep that dog close. He's earned his spot at your side. Garrett nodded, relief flooding him. We won't forget. They returned home that evening, Sophie singing softly to Rex as the sun set through the trees. For the first time, laughter drifted through the farmhouse windows, tentative but real. That night, Garrett sat with Sophie and Rosie on the porch. The air was cool, clean, scented with rain. Rex lay at their feet, eyelids drooping, content. Sophie curled against Garrett's side, her voice sleepy and sweet. Do you think Henry knows we helped? Garrett squeezed her hand. I think he does, and I think Rex knows too. Rosie smiled. He always was a good judge of character. Maybe he was meant to find you. Maybe you were meant to find him. Garrett watched the stars blink to life in the vast Indiana sky, his heart full of gratitude and something like hope. They had uncovered the truth. They had brought justice. And together, they had found family again. Broken, battered, but stronger than ever. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more healing, maybe even more threats. But for tonight, they had each other and the knowledge that sometimes the darkest secrets can only be brought into the light by those brave enough to keep searching. The summer dusk deepened outside the Monroe house, painting the yard in long blue shadows and copper light. Inside, Garrett tried to enjoy the peace, but wariness gnawed at him. Sophie was sprawled on the living room rug, humming to Rex, while Rosie sat at the kitchen table sorting mail. Garrett watched the fading sunlight through the front window, every muscle still primed for trouble. The days after Caleb's arrest had been a strange mix of relief and waiting. Waiting for a knock, a phone call, a new threat. Sheriff Carter's deputies cruised by often, but it wasn't lost on Garrett that real peace hadn't settled yet. Even Rex, though healing seemed uneasy, he paced the hallways, dozing in short bursts, head snapping up at every creak. It was just past midnight when Garrett's unease finally proved right. He was awakened by a metallic crash from the garage. He rolled from bed, heart pounding, grabbing the shotgun he kept by the dresser. Rosie hurried from the guest room, eyes wide. "Say it with Sophie," he whispered. He crept through the darkness, ears straining. Another crash, closer this time. He flicked on the porch lights, their white beams slicing through the shadows. Through the garage window he saw movement, a figure, bulky and familiar. Caleb. Somehow, despite the evidence, the jail, the charges, Caleb was back. And this time, Garrett could see the glint of a gun in his hand. Garrett pressed himself against the wall, adrenaline flooding his body. He dialed the sheriff's office with trembling fingers. "It's Caleb. He's back, armed. Get here fast." But Caleb was already moving. A window shattered. The back door slammed open. Garrett heard Sophie's terrified voice. Then Rex's deep bark. Savage. Unrelenting. Garrett burst into the hallway just as Caleb appeared, wild-eyed, gun pointed at Rosie and Sophie. Rosie held Sophie close, shielding her with her own body. Rex stood between them and Caleb, old but unyielding. Hackles raised. Caleb sneered, waving his gun. "You think you've beaten me? You think that box means anything? I want it all. The files, the locker, the dog. Everything." "Put the gun down, Caleb," Garrett shouted, stepping into the light, keeping his shotgun trained but not firing, not with Sophie in the line. Caleb laughed, the sound brittle and desperate. "I'm not leaving without what's mine." A tense standoff hung in the air, seconds stretching into eternity. Garrett's mind spun, searching for any move that wouldn't get someone hurt. Rex crept closer to Caleb, silent, every muscle taut. Sophie sobbed softly, face buried in Rosie's shoulder. Caleb cocked the gun, pointing it straight at Garrett. "Give it to me. Now." In that instant, Garrett saw Rex's muscles coil. The old dog lunged, faster than anyone expected. Caleb fired. The shot went wide, shattering a picture frame on the wall. Rex crashed into Caleb, jaws clamping down on his arm. Caleb screamed, swinging wildly. Garrett rushed forward. He and Caleb grappled, the shotgun falling away. Caleb landed a wild punch, splitting Garrett's lip, but Garrett didn't let go. Sophie screamed. Rosie pulled her away, ducking behind the kitchen counter. The two men crashed into the hallway, fighting for control of the gun. Caleb's rage was animal, wild and thrashing, but Garrett held on, thinking only of Sophie, of Rex, of the months of fear that had eaten at them all. Suddenly Rex was there again, blood on his muzzle, eyes blazing. He sank his teeth into Caleb's calf, dragging him off balance. Garrett seized the moment, wrenching the gun from Caleb's grasp. Sirens split the night. Blue and red lights strobed through the Harry-Sian windows as Sheriff Carter and his deputies screeched to a halt outside. They burst in, guns drawn, shouting commands. "Drop it, Monroe," Carter called, but Garrett was already tossing the gun away, hands in the air. Two deputies tackled Caleb, pinning him face down, handcuffing him with swift, practiced moves. "Got him," one shouted. "We've got him." Garrett slumped against the wall, chest heaving. Rosie hugged Sophie tightly, both shaking. Rex staggered to Garrett's side, panting heavily, blood seeping from a graze on his side. Carter surveyed the chaos. "You all right, Garrett?" Garrett nodded, voice hoarse. "Thanks to Rex, and all of you." Caleb was dragged outside, still cursing, his voice finally muffled by the squad car's doors. Carter's team swept the house, checking for accomplices, patching Garrett's split lip, tending to Rex's wound. For a long while, nobody spoke. The deputies collected the last evidence: the gun, the spent shell, Caleb's bloody jacket. Carter turned to Garrett, gripping his shoulder. "You and your family? Brave as hell. If not for that dog—" Garrett looked at Rex, tears stinging his eyes. "He's more than a dog. He's family." By sunrise, calm returned. Carter promised this time Caleb wouldn't see the outside of a cell again. Federal charges. No bail. All the proof needed. Sophie curled up next to Rex, whispering, "You saved me again, buddy. You're a real hero." Rex licked her hand, tail tapping faintly against the floor. Rosie patched Rex's side, her hands gentle. "He'll be okay, but he's been through so much." They watched as deputies drove away. The last squad car's lights fading, Garrett hugged Sophie and Rosie, then sat beside Rex, rubbing the old dog's ears. "Thank you, pal. You did it. You kept us safe." For the first time in a long while, Garrett felt the storm had passed. Not just the one in the sky, but the one that had lived inside him since the night Rex appeared on their porch. They had faced the worst, together, and come through it, battered but unbroken. As the morning sun rose, golden and warm, Garrett finally allowed himself to hope that peace, real peace, might be possible. And in Rex's weary, contented eyes, he saw gratitude, love, and the fierce spirit that had saved them all. The sun crept over the Indiana fields, flooding the Monroe farmhouse with soft gold. Inside, the hush was different this time, peaceful, not fearful. Garrett sat at the kitchen table, his arms draped around Sophie, Rosie brewing coffee nearby. Rex lay on the rug at their feet, his chest rising and falling in deep, even breaths, finally at rest. Sheriff Carter stopped by that morning, his face tired but his eyes relieved. "It's finished," he said simply. "Federal charges, airtight evidence. Caleb won't see the light of day for a long, long time. You did right by Henry and by Rex." Sophie beamed. "Does that mean we can keep Rex?" "Sheriff Carter?" The sheriff smiled, kneeling to scratch Rex's ears. "That old boy's exactly where he belongs, Sophie. He's a hero, and so are you." Days passed, and a gentler rhythm returned. Sophie helped Rosie in the garden, picking tomatoes and giggling at earthworms. Garrett fixed the old mailbox and replaced the locks on every door, but not because of fear. Just a sense of new beginnings. People from the community dropped by, bringing casseroles, flowers, and notes. One afternoon, a group of local veterans stood quietly on the porch, hats in hand, to thank Garrett and Sophie for helping to bring Henry's story into the light. "Men like him, and dogs like Rex, don't come around often," one of them said, eyes misty. "You gave him justice." Rex's wounds healed slowly, but something in him seemed to fade as the summer wore on. He followed Sophie everywhere, always with a wag of his tail, but he spent more and more time curled up in his favorite spot under the window, dozing in the sunlight. Sophie sensed the change before anyone else. One evening, as fireflies danced outside, she curled beside Rex and whispered, "It's okay if you're tired, buddy. You can rest now. I'll never forget you." Garrett and Rosie found her there the next morning, still snuggled into Rex's side. The old dog's eyes were closed, his breathing soft and shallow. Garrett knelt, stroking Rex's fur, a lump rising in his throat. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved us all." As the sun rose, Rex slipped away, peaceful, loved, a warrior finally allowed to lay down his burdens. Sophie's tears came in waves, but Garrett held her, rocking her gently. "He's not really gone, Soph. He's part of us now, part of our family's story, forever." A week later, they buried Rex under the old maple tree at the edge of the yard. Garrett carved a simple marker. Rex, a true hero, friends, neighbors, and even strangers from town gathered. The local animal shelter sent a wreath of wildflowers and a note. "In memory of a brave soul who proved again that the ones we save often save us right back." Sophie struggled with the emptiness at first. Nights were hardest. She missed the warm weight of Rex at her feet, the safety in his steady presence. Rosie spent hours with her, telling stories of Henry and Rex, turning the ache into something beautiful and proud. Then, one Saturday, Garrett drove Sophie to the shelter. They walked through rows of kennels, barking and yipping, echoing off the concrete. Near the end, Sophie stopped in front of a trembling puppy, its fur patchy, its eyes full of hope and fear. She knelt, holding out a hand. The puppy inched forward, sniffed, then collapsed into her lap with a happy sigh. Garrett smiled, tears shining in his eyes. What will you call her? Sophie grinned, holding the puppy close. Hope, because that's what Rex gave us. Hope settled into their home like she'd always belonged. She followed Sophie, but everywhere, tripping over her own paws, making the whole family laugh again. Garrett could feel the healing in the laughter, the love blooming new in old spaces. On the anniversary of Rex's rescue, the Monroes invited everyone who'd helped to the house. Rosie made chili, Sheriff Carter brought peach pie, and Sophie read a letter she'd written for Rex, her voice steady and strong. Rex came to us when we needed him most. He was brave when we were scared, strong when we were weak, and loving, even when he was hurt. He taught me that even when things are hard, there is always hope. So we will always remember him, and we will always try to help others the way he helped us. As dusk fell, they gathered by the maple tree, each placing a wildflower on Rex's grave. Garrett spoke last, voice thick with gratitude. Sometimes the ones we save are the ones who help us save ourselves. Thank you, Rex, for showing us the way home. The wind rustled the leaves overhead. Sophie squeezed Hope, who wiggled and licked her face, making her giggle through her tears. Before the night ended, Garrett looked out over his family, chosen in blood, new and old, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Their story, with all its darkness and pain, had become one of redemption, love, and the simple, miraculous bravery of a wounded dog who would not give up. And if you were moved by Rex's story, please like and subscribe to our channel for more real-life tales of courage, hope, and second chances. And remember, there are heroes in every shelter, waiting for someone to believe in them. Support your local rescue and consider donating to organizations that help both dogs and veterans find the families they deserve.